From the front lines of the Gulf War to recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, David Jackson has reported firsthand on the Middle East crisis for more than a decade. This week, he returns to the war zone to take you up close with the heroes defending freedom a world away.
Join me as we show you how Southern California's best and bravest are about to spend the Thanksgiving holidays from right here in the Middle East.
David Jackson's Iraq Thanksgiving, tonight at 10 on KCAL 9.
Well, Pat, let me tell you, it is a wild and windy Kuwait, and that's one of the reasons why we have such difficulty in every way to do our job here right now. We have winds that are kicking up to 45, 50 miles an hour. What you see behind me appears to look like fog. It really is not. This is desert sand that you've seen that before out of this part of the world in Iraq and Kuwait. That desert sand will kick up and you get just vicious windstorms, and we're in the middle of one of those today. Now, before we discuss what we're here in Kuwait doing exactly, we do want to take a quick look at what took place today in Iraq, and we're going to begin by taking a look in Fallujah. Some video that we have that shows some of the U.S. troops that are still making their way through the city there. They are going through and still checking individual buildings, literally going door to door, as we've been reporting for a while that has been underway. They have found rooms and basements that have been almost like torture chambers, described that way by the American troops that have gone through there. Evidence of blood on the floor, as we've talked about before, and that continues as they go through what might have been Al-Qaeda or some of Zarqawi's hiding areas in Fallujah. So that work's still underway by U.S. Marines. Very, very dangerous work indeed. And also the violence in Baghdad itself continuing. We've been talking about this throughout the course of the last couple of weeks. That has been escalating. There were more mortar rounds that were fired today into residential areas in Baghdad. At least one car being hit. I think we can take a look at that right now and you see what's going on the streets there. Very difficult time for the residents of Baghdad, who have obviously had to endure a lot of this. Here in Kuwait, people get emails back and forth from people in Baghdad saying they're afraid to go out of their house and go out onto the street because they hear the sound of shells flying over their heads and gunfire all the time. And even if nobody's directly injured, they simply cannot move out of their homes. And we also want to mention that there is, and there has been over the last couple of days here, what they consider to be the bright spot of information about this Arab summit of Arab leaders gathering in Egypt. And that has been highly anticipated in Kuwait because a Kuwaiti representative is there sitting with an Iraqi representative along with 20 others that have gathered to discuss the post-election Iraq that they expect to be a quiet and peaceful place after the 30th of January elections coming up. And I'm talking about that particularly because here that has been such a hopeful issue. They have never been able to sit down with an Iraqi since Saddam Hussein took power back in the 1970s, and that is something that the Kuwaitis especially, and really every neighboring country, has been very enthusiastic about, and finding a peaceful Iraqi representative sitting around a table with them is virtually unheard of in most people's entire lifetimes here. So very, very hopeful sign, and they hope that there's good information coming out of that particular meeting as it winds up probably tomorrow in Egypt. Now, right now, we also want to take a look at one of the camps. I want to explain that the American military, and this means lots of individuals from Southern California, are operating out of Kuwait here and crossing the borders back and forth into Iraq. We have literally thousands of troops coming out of a place called Camp Arif Jan. There's a couple other camps here. There's a Camp Victory and a Camp Navistar and a variety of camps, Camp Virginia. All of these are scattered up around the border between Iraq and Kuwait, and we've had a lot of the American troops going back and forth between these two locations, and we have spoken to a number of them from Southern California. And I want to mention, as I throw it back to Pat, that those individuals will be speaking to family members, and a very thrilling thing for a lot of them as they find out that they're actually able to talk to people at home. We'll be looking at that during the course of this half hour. Pat, I'll tell you, these are very difficult missions for these guys. I mean, we don't really need to tell the world that. Everybody knows what they're going through in Iraq. And last night I was up in the southern portion of Iraq right there on the border of Kuwait, where you will see, as we take a look at some videotape right now, where the roads go straight up into Baghdad, go into Basra, and eventually they make their way all the way up into Tikrit and Mosul in northern Iraq. These are 650, 750-mile trips that go up into that part of Iraq. Walking with me coming out of Iraq, literally a platoon of men who are coming back out of Tikrit. They had spent months and months involved in the battle, both in Fallujah and some fighting in Tikrit. As they made their way out of the country, they were literally just walking down the road. That's how a lot of the individuals do come out. They're in convoys and with trucks, and they come out and walk like that. and we got a chance to stand and talk for a moment with one of the corporals who was there in that platoon, and that would be Stephen Escalera, who is from West Covina. Here you are coming out of what, north of Baghdad. You're up in Tikrit?
Roger that, yes. In Tikrit.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like when you were up there.
It's got a lot going on. Got a lot of rough stuff you hear about on the news, and a lot of guys getting hurt up there. And I mean, we make it through. We're down here now. Get headed home in about 1 month. It's tough being out there. I mean, getting mortared every night, and I mean, it's tough being away from families, and I mean, being up there with everything going on. And just can't wait to go home.
What made you leave West Covina and enlist in the Army?
Wanted to travel, get out, see the world. That's my actual reason. I wanted to travel, got to see it. I've been to so many countries, and I'm only 20 years old. I bet you I've been to many more places than anybody's been in their life.
Yeah. Now it's Thanksgiving week. You got family and friends back in West Covina. You want to look right into that television and tell them something?
Got my wife. I want to say I love you, Eleanor. Happy Thanksgiving. The rest of my family. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll be home soon.
Well, Stephen Escalera is a very happy guy, as you can see, making his way out of Iraq. He's definitely seeing the world. He's seeing one part of the world. We heard him make reference to his wife back in West Covina, and that is where our Dave Clark is right now with his wife, who got a chance to see her husband make his way back to safety. Dave.
Hey, David, you made them very, very happy. His wife, Eleanor, is standing right next to me. I've got other members of the family here, but this is Eleanor. Steve, how'd he look? You loved it, didn't you?
He looked gorgeous. He looked gorgeous.
Jackson, they love you too because you did a tremendous package for this family in West Covina. You made them happy, and I'm glad I'm here too. We're live tonight in West Covina. Dave Clark, KCAL 9 News. Back to you.
Dave, thank you so much for that report. Wonderful to hear it put that way. Wonderful to hear from my end, that family. I can only imagine how they feel, really. I mean, here is that family member 12,000 miles away. This is as far away as you can be on the globe from Los Angeles. As we say, as they said, he saw the world, and he's fortunate to be back on safe turf right now. Two of the people in that platoon with him were killed on the way out in a convoy that was hit, that ran over a mine on the way down through the roadway there a little bit south of Baghdad, and that took place a little over a week ago. All of the men you saw right there, very fortunate they felt to be alive. So we're lucky to catch up with them as they crossed the border like that. We're going to be talking to some more individuals from Southern California. That'll be coming up later in the course of this particular hour. Now we'll go back to Pat in the studio. Pat.
Okay, David, that was such a wonderful thing to be able to connect those two families together, of course, being able to see their loved ones so far away in the Middle East. Just wondering the overall morale of the troops there. We've heard so many different stories, as you know, during that really tumultuous political climate over the last year or so. So you're there, you've talked to a lot of them. How are they feeling?
I think the morale is very good, Pat, and I've been here over a long period of time over the last couple of years, and all the way back through that first Gulf War, which really had an up and down morale status to it. Prior to the war, there was morale that actually dipped down a little bit lower, and then once things got going, I think the individual troops felt a little bit better about it, and morale rose. These guys that were coming out of Iraq, as you saw with me there last night, they are so relieved, obviously, to be leaving the theater of the war itself, that morale for them is sky high. But I'll tell you what's interesting about that is, out of all those people, and I believe this is true for Stephen Escalera also, not 100% certain, but I think it is, they are volunteering, most of them, to return back up the road all the way to Tikrit to get more people who are from their division, bring them back down into safe territory and into the camps here on the border between Kuwait and Iraq. And it takes a lot of nerve to go back up in there and do that. As we told you, 2 people killed the last time they came down. But Corporal Escalera, a lot of others, that's very, very high morale indeed to be able to go back and forth and work with the other troops that are still up there. So we'll hear from some more coming up later in the course of this show, as we said. But yes, morale very good, Pat.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dave. And David, as you heard, we'll have more on our brave servicemen and women serving in the Middle East. Still ahead here in Kuwait City. David.
Pat, you're right. A very lonely time for a lot of people who have to spend this time so far away from their family members in the United States and halfway around the world here. We were explaining how in the camps here in Kuwait, we are just on the border with Kuwait and Iraq, and a lot of these support camps have many of the military troops, whether they be U.S. Army or U.S. Marines in there that are working to support the frontline troops that are up in Fallujah and up in northern Iraq. I got a chance at Camp Arif John. That is the largest one here that has some 6,500 military on it that are busily packing up tanks and Humvees and trucks to send them north. Got a chance to talk to a couple of folks there who are from Southern California, lonely but happy that they're not in Iraq right now.
We're mostly rear detachment back here that handles supply.
And we got a chance to call those families in Fullerton and in Palmdale. Hopefully they got an opportunity to watch just now and see family members who are busy here in Kuwait. And again, fortunate that they are not up in Iraq. Remember, a lot of the troops that are here in Kuwait actually have the option of deciding whether or not they want to be deployed or take the convoy trips up into Iraq. And a lot of people opting not to do that. Obviously, the majority opting not to do that, which is understandable, but a lot of hard work going into what they do as well. Now, equally as fortunate, maybe even more so for this holiday, is 40 or more troops that are National Guard troops who are from Los Alamitos and have been sent back home from a training mission to Oklahoma, where they have been preparing to go to Iraq. And our Dave Lopez is standing by right now in Orange County at Los Alamitos with some very fortunate individuals over this holiday. Dave?
Well, Dave, right you are. It is a special treat. They were not on Monday. From Los Alamitos, I'm Dave Lopez. Dave, back to you, 12,000 miles away.
All right, thanks very much, Dave, and I hope those people are ready to go into both a war zone and probably a wind-driven dust storm that they expect to take place through the course of the winter months here. It's a very, very harsh time of the year to be coming over here. Pat, back to you.
Okay, Dave, we'll talk to you a little bit later. Moving on.
Well, good morning, Pat. It really has turned from summer to winter here just in the span of one day. I think you can still see what we're looking at behind me now. That amounts to a sand and dust storm coming off the deserts here of Kuwait. We're not too far from the Iraqi border, a little bit south of the Iraqi border in Kuwait City. And as I said, it's dropped about 20 or 30 degrees from yesterday, and we face some rather harsh conditions, and that means all the men and women up north also face those conditions. A rough time here. We want to take a look at some of what has been taking place in Iraq over the past 24 hours. Take a look at a remarkable videotape right now that was shot actually by the insurgents up around the Baghdad area of a U.S. convoy. If you look right now, you will see the truck blowing up, a U.S. convoy truck blowing up. We talked yesterday to Stephen Escalera, who was the corporal from West Covina, who was actually in a convoy that did lose a truck this way by a car that exploded next to their convoy. They lost 2 men in that convoy. No way to confirm whether or not that video is that convoy, but that's the kind of thing that those troops face as they try to make their way south down here to be resupplied in Kuwait. We also want to talk a little bit about some of the activity in Fallujah itself as that begins to wind down a little bit, and fortunately for the troops that are in Fallujah, that is winding down, but they face another offensive now a little bit south of the city of Baghdad, and that's where U.S., British, and Iraqi troops have been battling against insurgents who are believed to be some of the same insurgents, perhaps, that moved south from Fallujah down to that date will represent a moment of democracy, really, for this region and also for the nation of Iraq. And the support is unanimous, and it was headlines today here in the paper. Everybody very pleased about what lies ahead just a little over, 2 months from right now inside Iraq. So they're very pleased about that, and we're going to be taking a look coming up in just a little while in this show inside Iraq, as well as we talk to some of the troops from California who are now stationed in southern Iraq, talking to them about 20 minutes past the hour. Live in Kuwait, I'm David Jackson. Now, Pat, back to you in the studio.
Okay, David, we'll check back in with you momentarily. But he's live now from Kuwait City with the latest. Dave?
Pat, that's right. We have California National Guard that are in Iraq right now in the southern portions of Iraq, and we also have frontline troops that are there, both the Marines and also the United States Army that are deployed into southern Iraq. As you know, historically, over the course of this conflict, there have been British troops mainly in the south and the southern portion. Anything below Basra and all the way down to the port city of Qasr, which is where all the humanitarian supplies, if there really are any getting into Iraq, are making their way in. I'm going to take a look right now with you at some videotape that we took yesterday. We managed to take our own vehicle and drive in. The military suggests that you do not do this, of course, unless you're under strict watch by the military. They took us in through the border across from Kuwait into the Qasr town, the village of Qasr, which is where the port is. We followed the combined British and U.S. military jeep contingent that led us in through the town, through the city, which even going that short distance, I've done it before about a year ago, and there was no problem doing it at the time. It's certainly a problem today. There is nothing friendly about the local population as you make your way into the actual port facility itself. It was a little bit different inside the port. The port itself was a functional place, I guess I would call it. They are handling 4 ships, they say, a month in there. We watched as rice from Vietnam was being unloaded from ships and taken onto some trucks there. And that is 4 ships when they expected to have 100 ships a month that were being handled. I also got a chance in there to talk to a couple of the California National Guard who know that they are going to be in for the long haul.
Typically, it's not the local people in Qasr. It's people from out of the area who are creating the disturbances up north, coming down here and trying to create problems down here. But like I said before, the local Iraqi port police work very closely with the folks in town and try to keep that kind of element out here and preventing the work from being interrupted.
We get reports from now and again that, you know, some of the locals that don't like the Americans are going to try something, but usually it just falls through, and we have a lot of locals that are working to try to help quell anything like that as well, you know, to keep it quiet and let them know that, you know, we're not the bad guys. You know, we're here trying to help, and hopefully by making relationships here with these guys, that will help in the long run.
So the wind can blow either way pretty quickly, can't it?
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. So we're always prepared, you know, one way or the other. We're here, as you can see, I'm not wearing anything, but I have everything close by. So if things, you know, went the other way, we're ready to rock and roll.
Sergeant Dodson originally from the Harbor City area, and Captain Messina had come from Camarillo. Again, they're with the California National Guard deployed down there at the Qasr area. And what they were talking about, of course, was the change in the wind, as they say, in the town, in the area of southern Iraq there, where now they really are confined to the port facility itself. They can't go out into the town because of the nature of the hostility of the population there. There have been no incidents, nothing that's really taken place versus the troops that are stationed there from Basra south, but nobody's very comfortable either, and they really have had a difficult time because they can't leave the offices in the port area right where they are. Used to be when they went into the town, they said it was a little more comfortable environment, and they expected to interact with the population, which they did do after the cessation of the initial hostilities, but now that can't happen, and they don't know when or if they will be able to do that. And very difficult time, and we talked to them. They said they were here for 535 days. That is their deployment, so they're here well into almost the end of next year. Pat, back to you.
No, David, I remember when you were there in 1991 and you were able to move freely around Iraq. I'm going to get to those gloves you're wearing in just a moment, but you were able to move freely crossing over from Kuwait to Iraq, especially where you are.
Well, it was what a change. I mean, Pat, that's right. We've been able to do that over the years to a certain extent, and in the last year and a half, from the beginning of the war in 2003 until now almost. I mean, you could go into Iraq, and there was a sense that the Iraqi population was happy initially, obviously, to see the American troops, and they were happy to say that Saddam Hussein was run from power. In fact, we have some extensive conversation with a few of the dock workers there in Qasr who are very, very pleased to this minute about the fact that the government is now gone in Iraq and that they're beginning to lead normal lives. They blame outside elements for the insurgency in Iraq. They maintain that it's not Iraqis at all. Not necessarily the case, but that is what the people who I spoke with at the port talked about, and we're going to show you a little bit more about them coming up next week. But sort of flesh out some of the details of how they live their lives and how they feel about what's going on in their country. But even they admitted, and they said to me, you cannot take your car. Don't go out. Don't drive into the town. Don't start trying to mix it up in the community the way you might have done a year ago. I did that a year ago. They said unless you're with a military patrol, and even then it's not necessarily a good idea, you just simply cannot deal with the local population. And we saw that in the 3-4 miles that we drove across there through the border points. The first time you encounter a 10-year-old schoolgirl, it is hostile when they realize that you are either an American or an outsider or even with the United Nations. So it's a very uncomfortable, unpleasant, and tragic situation that is the way that the whole of the southern Iraq portion has now drifted. It's not enjoyable for anybody, and this may be a long, long haul before that is a normalized population. Pat?
No, that certainly is too bad. And I said 1991, referring to the first Gulf War where you were, David, but you were talking about a year ago, which you were exactly.
Second Gulf War.
Okay. Now, about the gloves. It's obviously, I mean, we talked to you just 20 minutes ago, and you seem relatively comfortable. I know it was a little chilly, you said, because I talked to you before we went on the air here, but has the temperature just gone down in that short amount of time?
You know, Pat, we talked about it yesterday a little bit when we first took this live shot at 10 o'clock p.m. your time yesterday, and again at 10 o'clock today. You see behind me here, we're in downtown Kuwait City. You see the tower right here, and what you're looking at is sort of a combination of cold fog and dust and sand that blows off the deserts here when a front comes through this area. And the fronts sweep through here in a much more dramatic fashion than we're used to having in Southern California, or really in California at all. I mean, they can have a temperature swing here that'll go from 78 degrees down to like 28 degrees in no time at all. It's starting to warm up right now. It isn't quite that bad, but I mean, it goes from summer to winter in the span of, a day and a half, and that is essentially what's happening right now. But it really makes things very difficult for the military also, because we talked to some of these guys involved in the convoys that are moving from here all the way up to Baghdad. Again, a 600-mile drive. They have to be prepared for all sorts of weather. The vehicles break down because of the dust and wind, and it's very, very harsh conditions. There's nothing easy about any of the military activity that has to take place over here. We'll be detailing that a little bit more tomorrow night, as well as we get it a little bit closer to the holiday. Live in Kuwait City, I'm David Jackson reporting. Now, Pat, back to you.
Okay, it's a great-looking shot, by the way, David. So we'll let you go get some warmth for a minute. That was David Jackson reporting live from. Good morning, David.
It is good morning. You're right, Pat. That's right. It is already Thanksgiving morning for us, Thursday morning here in this part of the world in Kuwait City. It has dawned clear, as you can see, for the first time since the some number of days since we've been here. And, of course, also very cold, which has been coming our way as well. Thousands of U.S. troops preparing to move down out of Iraq today and back up into Iraq. We have the movement headed both directions. And for those troops that are headed up into the nation, they're going to face some rather difficult tasks ahead. We're going to take a look right now at some of the activity that's been taking place today in Iraq, beginning with some events that have been in and around the Baghdad area itself, that have been used against the U.S. forces along the way there in northern Iraq, and really astonished many people who saw the amount that is there. Also, we wanted to mention to you as we come back here live to Kuwait, we mentioned that these convoys had gone back and forth from north to south. There was another attack on a convoy coming south out of Baghdad, and that injured 2 U.S. soldiers, and we were up near where the convoys arrive here in Kuwait a little bit earlier. This was last night, and they're aware of that fact. Very dangerous coming down that road, the 500-mile stretch from Baghdad to here. Have to go up there with them. It's going to be a very busy day today here from the southern portion of the convoy road. We are going to talk to some Southern Californians who are here a little bit later in our hour today, and some who are headed in and some who are headed out on this Thanksgiving Day in Kuwait City. Pat, back to you.
All right, thanks for that, DJ. We'll see you a little bit later in the broadcast.
And I'm David Jackson in Kuwait City, where today thousands of U.S. troops will be headed up into Iraq and some coming out, many from Southern California. And we will hear from some of the very fortunate who are getting ready to go home on this Thanksgiving holiday, and some who face a war zone ahead. That's coming up.
From Kuwait City, David.
Pat, we have an interesting combination of individuals really here, because we have those individuals who are coming out of Iraq who have been inside the war zone, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and then we have those who are about to begin sometimes their first tour of duty and sometimes their second or third tour of duty up in the nation. They spend their time here at a place called Camp Arif Jan, and we'll take a look at it right now, which is a large military base here full of supplies as well as individuals, and it's also full of lots of things that have been collected there from the United States to make people feel at home. This being Thanksgiving Day, you will see pictures on the walls. You'll see letters from school children, turkeys that are put up along the walls there inside the PXs and places where they eat and spend time, these troops. It is something to try to make them feel comfortable and remind them of home. We talked to a couple of individuals who are from Southern California who had just come out of Iraq and who had spent the last year, one solid year, up there, and that includes a grandmother from Riverside County. What was it like while you were in Iraq and things were dicey?
Well, of course you think of home when things happen, but because you're around people that we're all in the same situation and we all know how to take care of each other, we just move on.
It's almost Thanksgiving. On the other side of that lens is the entire family. Would you like to say a word or two?
Sure, I would like to say hello to my daughter Anna and my son Bryce and my grandson Joseph. Happy Thanksgiving.
How did your family keep a sense of humor?
I'd email them as much as I could when I could, or call, occasionally and say, hey, I'm okay, I'm all right, because every time they'd see something on the news about Iraq, this or that, they'd freak out naturally. But I kept saying, calling, writing, saying, hey, I'm okay, don't worry about it. When you stop hearing from me, then worry. So
here we are one day before Thanksgiving, and I'm sure you have something you'd like to say to them.
Oh boy, you're gonna put me on the spot, huh? Hi Mom, hi family, friends, Shannon, my girlfriend, I love you. Sorry for making you crazy, and I'll see you soon.
Now that was Sergeant Campsey from the Lake Paris area, Sergeant Days from Rancho Cucamonga, and as he mentioned, they will be seeing their families relatively soon. They are in reprocessing right now at Camp Arif Jan, and then they will of course move out of Kuwait, and both of them will head back to Southern California in the not too distant future. Now to flip the coin the other way, we will talk to some individuals here who are going into Iraq rather than coming out of Iraq, and one of them is a staff sergeant who is from the Baldwin Park area, and she has spent a lot of time in war zones. We're talking about Staff Sergeant Christina Aguilera, who is now headed up into Iraq.
This is my second deployment, so my family took it a little bit harder the second time around because the first time around I had a pretty bad experience and they were just afraid that I was going to go through this again. And plus my mother lost a brother in Vietnam, so they never really recuperated from a whole family member going to combat.
Now somebody back at home is watching this on Thanksgiving Day or the day before. Do you have anything you'd like to say to them?
I do. I just miss my family, and as everybody knows, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. So this is a time where my family, we come together for Mass, and then after we play a little friendly game of tag football, and then we come over to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. So that's our tradition. So I handed it off, the baton to family members, so hopefully they're doing okay. Anybody you want to talk to directly right there? To my mom and dad, just I love you guys, and to my brothers and sisters, just thank you for all your support, and especially my sister who lost a baby this year. Knew you were being something better for us, so I miss you guys, and thank you all for your support.
Some words from Sergeant Christina Aguilera headed up into the war zone. There is a very nervous family who is in Baldwin Park right now watching their daughter on television, and that is where our Dave Clark is at this moment, standing by with them. Dave.
David, you did it again. You made us all cry. We're in the Baldwin Park home of Staff Sergeant Aguilera. I'm with her mom right here, and her did good, and David Jackson delivered once again. It made Thanksgiving very special here in Baldwin Park. And we're live in Baldwin Park. I'm Dave Clark, KCAL 9 News. Hey, back to you again.
Dave, I'll tell you what, a lot of people crying over that's for sure, and that included Sergeant Aguilera, who was fighting back tears during our discussion with her there, and had a hard time doing so, but nice to be able to link those families together like that. Live in Kuwait City, I'm David Jackson. Pat, back to you.
Well, David, probably what makes this even more, for our viewers to just understand exactly what some of the dangers that Christina faced when she was in theater.
Well, she's faced a lot of danger, Pat, and that's right. She mentioned that this was her second time into a very, very dangerous combat zone. Now, this is her first time going into Iraq, but she has just come out of 1 year in Afghanistan. And when she was in Afghanistan, she is a chaplain's assistant. That is actually what she does while she is in the service. And she is the assistant to a chaplain who is a Lutheran reverend from Burbank, actually. And she is assigned to protect him. She's armed, he's not. And they were in Afghanistan together. And she faced, as she put it, some very difficult circumstances. And it's always handling the deceased, people who have been killed in battle, and she has to sometimes contact family members or be responsible for the contact from the Army that goes out to those family members. And it's very, very hard on her. She has a hard job, more difficult, frankly, than a lot of people have in the military, because she has to be around a lot of those who are wounded and deceased in battle. So very, very tough situation for her. But we'll hear from her a little bit later on our sister station, KCBS Channel 2. That'll come up at 11 o'clock. But for now, live in Kuwait City, I'm David Jackson. Pat, back to you in the studio.
Okay, David, and I'm going to take this time to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. I miss having you here.